This video is actually going to deal with 4 chapters, but the first 2 we'll deal with are chapters 3 and 4, Filling the Void and Democratization. But let's start dealing with musical textures. And to begin that discussion of musical textures, let's take a look at some Greek prefixes. Mono, meaning one, poly, meaning many, homo, meaning the same, and a hymn, which comes from the Greek, meaning a song of praise. Monophonic music deals with one sound, polyphonic, many sounds, and homophonic, the same sounds. And here you can see a graphic representation of how that might look musically. I am putting a video in the playlist that you'll see later in the video that deals with explaining musical textures. But for now, we're going to be talking about a hymn, and a hymn has the homophonic texture, where the melody line, as you can see in that graphic there, is supported with a harmonic structure below it. So a hymn is a strophic poem. It's metered both poetically and musically, and it is, as I mentioned previously, homophonic. Here's an example of a very popular hymn, We Gather Together, and this would be considered a hymn. There is an example in the playlist that you can hear this hymn being sung. If you look at the text, we gather together to ask the Lord's blessing. He chastens and hastens his will to make known. The wicked oppressing now cease from distressing. Sing praises to his name, he forgets not his own. You can hear the poetic meter there. And this, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see where it says, underneath the music, where it says text, and then it says tune. So every hymn has a tune name. This tune name is called Kremser. And it also, in this variation, it lists the poetic meter. How many syllables per line? So this is 12, 11, 12, 11. This also has a music meter. So this is in 3/4. You don't necessarily need to know that. But just so you are familiar with what a hymn is, it is strophic, metered, and homophonic. And I'll give you a number of examples actually in the playlist of hymns. Derivative music. That is music which is drawn from another source. And here we're speaking specifically of music that is drawn from the popular culture. So music that's not of the church's own. And I'm going to put an example of Peter, Paul, and Mary, their famous song called Blowin' in the Wind from the 1960s. And then after that, you're going to hear an example of the kind of music that was described as democratic, for the people, by the people, and of the people, this folk music. And Peter, Paul, and Mary were, very popular folk writers in that singer-songwriter period of popular music, which gave us people like Bob Dylan as well. Many other singer-songwriters. But in the church, we also had people like Joe Wise. And in the list, you will see an example of his song, Gonna Sing My Lord. And you'll see how simple it is and how it tries to be in that folk tradition. This is music from the 1960s and 70s, which was incredibly popular in the American Catholic Church. Now, we'll move on to liturgical music of the 70s and 80s. What we notice is that the style changes quite frequently to accommodate new trends in the popular taste. And we see that this folk revival styling matures in the Catholic Church, and so we get groups like the St. Louis Jesuits, who are still very popular, and if you are a churchgoer, you will probably still sing their music. The good thing about their music, as opposed to the very earliest folk style of music that comes to the church, is that the texts are scriptural. So this kind of helps us along in the Catholic Church, you know, to have scriptural texts. Makes sense. Some of the compositions of the St. Louis Jesuits are Glory and Praise to Our God, Here I Am, Lord. And in the playlist, you will hear this progression from Peter, Paul, and Mary to Joe Wise to the St. Louis Jesuits. And I put a couple of their examples. Be Not Afraid, I believe, and Here I Am, Lord. Some of their most popular. Also, they wrote One Bread, One Body, another popular song of theirs. I think it's important for you to take a look at pages 69 and 70 on Swain's discussion of relevance. And I'm going to show you a couple of photos here that are from Manhattan College Chapel, and I think they tend to show the issue of trying to be relevant to a particular congregation quite well and failing. So this first image here, this is from back in the early 2000s, and the priest for Manhattan College tried to be relevant, if you will, by dressing up the church, and he used helium balloons, which I found to be incredibly distasteful. I'm not exactly sure what he was trying to do there, but it was for a special feast. You can see that he's also put a lot of candles in sanctuary, which is kind of pretty. Here's another image from Manhattan College Chapel, and this is for Valentine's Day. And the priest has decided to put down some heart-shaped boxes of chocolates and stuffed animals, and I just thought how interesting it was. I had to take a picture of it. My friends couldn't believe it when they saw it, but you know, it just doesn't seem appropriate. But it's this desire to be relevant. You know, the funny thing is, well, not so funny, but after communion, he raffled off those things in front of the altar, the chocolates and the stuffed animals. It was not a good moment. And finally, one more picture from the chapel, and this is right around Halloween. And the priest decided to put out these plastic lighted pumpkins and turn all the lights out in the chapel so that you could see them. And I was like, well, how are the people going to be able to see the music so they know what to sing? Again, the issue of trying to be relevant. It's like, you don't have to try so hard. But it seems as though in the church, you know, people really do try to be hard to make, you know, what will the young people sing? What kind of music will they sing? And I think, you know, those kinds of questions will always be wondered about. You know, how do we become relevant? Do we even try to be relevant? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I think if you take a look at pages 69 to 70 in Swain's text, I think it's really good discussion of trying to be relevant and what that gets us. Let me just say something briefly about the YouTube playlist. You can see a link down there, but I will also send you a link if you want to type it in. It's a long string, but here you have like 12 videos, and you don't have to watch all of them, but you should, you know, watch like 2 or 3 minutes of each of these. And there you can see a description of like musical textures, but also like what's a hymn, and then the folk music, and then a progression of liturgical music that can really trace from the 1960s, the folk revival, to the music that we have today. And you can tell that it's very inflected by popular music. And you also notice like how that music changes throughout the decades since the Second Vatican Council. And then the final video is the hymn, O Sacred Head Surrounded, which appeals to nearly everyone. Democratization. Now let's deal with the next two topics. Of course you can pause this video and come back to it, but to watch those videos, I think that's important for you to do. The next topics that we're dealing with is the diversity in liturgical music and the state of the art. And to begin that, I think it's important to consider which comes first. Is it practice or is it belief? Another question, did you choose your faith or was it chosen for you? And then finally, why does the liturgical music matter? So when we get together on video chat, we'll talk about those questions. I want to give you two Latin phrases. The first is lex orandi, which means the law of prayer. Basically, lex orandi means the way that we pray will inform us in how we believe. The next phrase I want to bring up to you is lex credendi, the law of belief. And in a nutshell, this phrase refers to that how we believe, what we believe, will inform how we pray. Lex orandi, lex credendi. And some people might have very different understandings of the church and liturgy and how it relates to, does the belief come first or does the way we pray come first? And then I love this quote here. I just think it's really beautiful because Swain talks about mediocrity and Martha Graham. The only sin is mediocrity. Think about that. I do. As a singer, as an actor, as a musician, what does this mean? I mean, it can apply to people who are not in the arts as well. But what do we strive for? What do we attain to be in our lives? Certainly, I hope it's not mediocre. And I think this final YouTube playlist, which I'll show you here, really goes to the heart of that question of mediocrity. So the first two videos really show, or the first video really shows the beauty of polyphony. It's something that's definitely not mediocre. But then the simplicity that we get in the chants, and then the "O Come All You Faithful." You know, how do children learn about their faith? By the use of various hymns, and I think this is a great example of that. And then we have two Protestant hymns, and then the final video should begin at the 5th minute, and that's an example of how plain chant is being used by the people. Again, there's a link to that video there. It's a long string, but I'll send that to you as well. So take a look at all those videos, and I'll see you in the chat.